I came out of brain surgery with a bandaged skull, and no one by my side. But before we get to that, before the bandages, before the silence, before the castle photo that shattered whatever pieces of trust I still clung to, we have to go back a few months, to the moment it all shifted. Not with a crash, but with a whisper. You should come back in. We saw something. 2. That's how it starts, doesn't it? Quietly. One sentence from a technician trying to keep their face unreadable. I was sitting in the MRI waiting room with a cardigan draped over my knees, clutching a chipped purse I'd had since 2008. Everything about the moment was ordinary, until it wasn't. They called me into a smaller office, dim lighting, beige walls, and a water cooler humming in the corner like background noise for bad news. The technician didn't say much, just told me to wait for the attending, so I sat there, trying not to overthink it, but that only works if you're not already used to carrying worst-case scenarios in your chest, like extra organs. The doctor was young, polite, too careful in how he positioned his body. He sat down across from me and said the scan showed a shadow, something behind my left eye. Non-cancerous, he clarified immediately. But benign but encroaching, he said, like that would make me feel better. As if the word benign made it less terrifying that my own brain was crowding itself. He showed me the images. I stared, nodding slowly like I understood, even though my mind had already gone somewhere else. 6 weeks, he said. That's the recommendation. Surgery soon. No guarantee on side effects if I waited. I thanked him, shook his hand, walked out, didn't cry, didn't call anyone. I just went home, put the keys in the dish, and sat on the couch for an hour, jacket still on, shoes still tied. That's when the quiet hit. The kind that doesn't come from lack of noise, but from the realization that no one's going to notice if you don't speak. I've always been alone, but this felt different. My name is Margot, I'm 68 years old, and for most of my life, I've taken pride in not needing anyone, not because I believed I was unbreakable, but because I learned, young, that needing people made you fragile. When my husband Patrick walked out, our daughter Lena was 9, no alimony, no calls, just a note on the fridge and a frozen bank account. I sold my wedding ring to pay for Lena's braces, took on 2 billing jobs, stacked holiday shifts like sandbags, and not once, not ever, did I ask Lena to remember it. Because that's not why you do it. You do it because love, real love, shows up without being asked. No scoreboard, no debts. She grew up bright, stubborn, full of fire. She got into college on merit, but I paid every dime of what the grants didn't cover. I packed her up for Atlanta, cried the whole drive back to our 2-bedroom house, then went straight back to work the next morning. That's what mothers do. I told myself, that's how we survive. And I never complained. Not out loud, even when birthdays passed with only a voicemail, even when my mailbox was filled more often with bills than postcards. I figured distance was natural. Life gets busy. Kids have lives. But when I sat on that couch after the MRI, still clutching the folder of scan results like it might explode, I realized something terrifying. There's no one else. Not really. Sure, I had a neighbor, Paula, kind, well-meaning, always dropping off banana bread. But we were waved from the driveway close, not emergency contact close. And then there was Lena, my daughter, the only person I had left who might care what happened to me next. I hadn't called her yet. I didn't even know how to start the conversation. We weren't estranged, not exactly. We texted, exchanged birthday messages, called on holidays, but it always felt like I was knocking on a door that never opened more than a crack. I was a part of her life in the way an old yearbook is part of your bookshelf. Still there. Still known. But untouched. Still, the moment came when I had to dial. It took me 3 tries. My hands were shaking so badly I had to steady them on the counter. The phone rang twice before she answered. Hey, Mom. Everything okay? Her voice was bright, distracted. Probably multitasking. I hesitated. I had an MRI. They found something behind my eye. Silence. Then a beat too long. Then, is it cancer? No, they say it's benign, but pressing on something important. I need surgery. In about 6 weeks. Another pause. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, of course, I'll come. Just let me know the date. Just like that, the ice cracked a little. For the first time in weeks, I exhaled. I'll schedule it mid-February. You don't have to do much. Just help me get home. Maybe stay the weekend. Just be there. She agreed without resistance. Said she'd bring snacks, help me get set up. Said all the right things. I hung up and felt something close to relief bloom in my chest. That weekend, I washed the guest sheets, cleaned out the fridge, made a list of her favorite snacks, bought a soft pink throw blanket I knew she loved from her teenage years, and folded it neatly over the arm of the couch. I kept thinking, maybe this is what brings us back together. Maybe the surgery would crack something open, not just in my skull, but in us. I let myself hope. That was my first mistake. The week before surgery passed in slow motion. I started preparing for everything like it was a quiet, lonely war, one I knew I'd have to fight with a calm face and a trembling body. I sorted the mail, cleared the fridge, made sure all my bills were on autopay. I folded laundry like it mattered, as if the state of my linen closet could protect me from what was coming. I bought extra toilet paper, stocked the freezer with soup, and filled every pillbox in advance like it might somehow give me control over something. Every time I looked at the couch, where Lena would be sleeping, I imagined her there, curled up in the blanket I'd laid out, half asleep, yawning, and telling me stories from her job. That image kept me steady. Until the phone rang. It was a Thursday, cloudy, the kind of day that felt gray even in the bones. I was vacuuming the hallway when I heard it buzz on the kitchen counter. "Hey, Mom." Lena's voice was forced, too cheerful. I knew the moment I heard it, that instinct you get after raising someone through every fever, every tantrum, every time they lied about finishing homework. You just know. I paused the vacuum and leaned against the wall. "Everything all right?" "Well, here's the thing," she said, and her tone dropped into a rehearsed cadence. "Brad's firm scheduled a last-minute leadership retreat in Miami. It's a huge thing. All the spouses are expected to attend. It's already booked and paid for." I didn't say anything, just stood there gripping the phone like it was a live wire. She kept going, her words rushing forward like water, trying to fill silence. "I feel horrible, really. I was planning on being there, but this just came up. And it's kind of important. But I'll come the week after. I promise." I stared at the living room window, watching the wind press gently against the glass like it was trying to get in. "I see," I said, voice steady. "Mom, I swear, I'll be there as soon as I get back. I'll even take more time off. This is just really bad timing." Bad timing. That's what she called it, like it was a dentist appointment. Like it was a lunch we could reschedule, instead of brain surgery involving a swollen skull and the possibility I might not wake up. But I didn't say that. I didn't say anything cruel or dramatic. I simply said, "Okay. I understand." And in that moment, I hated how easy it was for me to say it, how natural it still felt to smooth things over for her, even with my life on the line. We hung up. No tears, no argument, just a click, and then nothing. I stood in the hallway a long time, the vacuum still buzzing against the rug. Eventually, I turned it off and sat down on the floor. I thought about the hundreds of times I'd shown up for her, not just physically, but emotionally. I thought about when she was 12 and failed her math test and cried for hours because she thought she wasn't smart anymore, and how I stayed up all night creating flashcards so she could feel confident again. I thought about how I drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to help her move apartments when she got her first job and realized her boyfriend wouldn't help. I thought about every birthday cake, every financial bailout, every tiny sacrifice I never counted until that moment. And it hit me, not as a sudden wave, but like cold water in a slow drip. I wasn't surprised. Not really. Somewhere deep inside, I had expected this. I just didn't want to believe it. Still, I packed my bag alone, printed my medical forms, set my emergency contact as my neighbor Paula, who I now trusted more than my own child. I even filled out the advance directive form by myself. Paula signed it as a witness, looking hesitant the whole time. "You sure you don't want to wait for Lena to get here?" she asked. "She's got a retreat," I said, and that was all the explanation I gave. The morning of the surgery, I woke before dawn. Not because I was nervous, but because my body was used to rising when it had something hard to do. I stood in the bathroom, staring at my reflection, no makeup, no earrings, just the face I'd worn for 68 years. I looked into my own eyes and whispered, Let's try to come back. The cab arrived on time. The driver didn't make conversation, just nodded when I said the hospital's name. I appreciated that. When I checked in, the receptionist smiled kindly and asked, "Will someone be joining you today?" "No," I said, "just me." She hesitated for a second, like she wasn't sure whether to pity me or leave it alone. Then she handed me a clipboard and gestured toward the waiting room. I sat down in one of those stiff plastic chairs and opened my phone just to keep my hands busy, scrolled past news headlines and spam emails. No new texts from Lena, just our last message. "Let me know how it goes. Love you. Love you." As if that was enough. As they wheeled me back, I kept staring at the ceiling tiles, counting them, trying not to cry. The anesthesiologist explained what would happen, but I barely heard him. All I could think was, I hope I wake up. I hope it's still me on the other side. Then the blackness swallowed everything. When I woke up, I didn't know where I was. The world came back in pieces, lights overhead, beeping machines, a soft voice muttering something I couldn't quite catch. I turned my head, pain bloomed like fire across my temple, and everything inside me wanted to retreat back into unconsciousness. Then a nurse appeared in my blurred field of vision. Young, maybe 25, brown ponytail, kind eye. "You're okay," she whispered. "Surgery's over. You're in recovery." I wanted to nod, wanted to speak, but my throat felt like sandpaper, and my brain was still half swallowed in anesthesia. I blinked slowly, trying to grasp onto something solid. Not okay, I thought. Not really. There was no one waiting in the chair beside me, no hand on mine, no voice saying, "Hey, you made it." Just the sterile sound of machines and the clink of tools being shuffled somewhere behind me. The nurse adjusted my blanket and smiled like she meant it. "You did great. We'll monitor you for the next day or so. Is anyone coming to pick you up?" I tried to answer. The words came out like gravel. "She said she'd be here later." I think I meant Lena. I think I meant my daughter, but even that title felt heavier than it used to. I drifted again. The pain meds pulling me under like a tide. The next day was worse. I was awake enough to feel everything. My head throbbed with a dull pressure like someone was dragging furniture across my skull. My left eye was swollen, my throat still raw from the breathing tube. I couldn't sit up without help, couldn't stand without the room tilting sideways. Still, I asked the nurse if anyone had called. She checked the clipboard. "No messages, I'm afraid." I nodded, the motion too slight to feel real. The surgeon came in, told me the tumor had been removed successfully, that there were no complications, that I'd done remarkably well for my age. I thanked him, barely hearing the words. Because while he was talking about staples and swelling, I was wondering if Lena had even thought of me. If she had looked at the date. If she'd paused for even a second while sipping a drink on some balcony and remembered her mother might be struggling to breathe with a line in her arm and gauze pressed against her head. 2 days later, they discharged me. A medical transport van brought me home. I clutched the seatbelt with shaking fingers, the world outside spinning by like I didn't belong in it anymore. When we pulled up to my house, I could barely push the door open. The driver had to walk me to the porch. I was embarrassed by how slow I moved, how weak I'd become. Paula, my neighbor, spotted me as I fumbled with the keys. She crossed the street like she'd been waiting for the moment, caught me just as my knees nearly buckled. "Margot," she gasped, slinging my arm over her shoulder. "Why didn't you call?" I didn't answer, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I didn't know which version of the truth would even make sense to speak aloud. She helped me to the couch, brought water, fluffed the pillows, asked if I needed food. "I'm fine," I said. It was a lie. I hadn't eaten since breakfast at the hospital. I couldn't remember the last time I'd showered. The painkillers were making my stomach churn, and my thoughts scatter like marbles. Once Paula left, I sat in the silence of my house, surrounded by shadows and stillness. The pink throw blanket Lena once loved was still folded neatly on the couch, untouched. The guest sheets remained crisp on the bed she never slept in. The weight of it all settled on my chest. I picked up my phone, without thinking. Not to call her. I didn't have the strength for that. I just opened Facebook, something mindless to keep from spiraling. That's when I saw it. A post. Tagged by someone with a name I didn't recognize. I almost scrolled past it until I saw Lena's face. There she was, at Disney, in front of Cinderella's castle, wearing pink mouse ears and sunglasses, grinning wide enough to see the gap in her front teeth she used to hate. Brad was beside her, smiling, arms wrapped around his mother, who sat in a rented motor scooter like she was royalty. The caption read, "Family Magic 2025. Making memories that last forever." My hand went cold. I zoomed in, looked again. Lena was laughing, pointing at something off-screen. Her whole body radiated joy. I blinked, stunned. 3 days ago, I had been under a knife. 3 days ago, I had woken up wondering where she was. And there she was, in Florida, smiling like nothing in the world could touch her. I swiped to the next post. A video. Brad filming as Lena helped his mother into a boat ride, her voice sweet and patient. "Careful, Mama. Hold on tight." Then someone in the background said it. "You're the best daughter-in-law ever." And that was the moment something inside me cracked. It wasn't the laughter, it wasn't the castle, it wasn't even the obvious lie about a leadership retreat. It was that word. Daughter. Because I was the one who raised her, who worked until my back gave out, who went hungry so she could have more, who held her when the world was too loud. Now she was feeding churros to someone else's mother, calling her mama, smiling, like our entire life together had been a draft she decided not to keep. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't send a dozen texts demanding answers. I just typed one sentence. Hope the fireworks were loud enough to drown out the guilt. And then I hit send. The moment I hit send, I didn't expect a reply. I didn't expect anything. That was the point. Not revenge, not confrontation, just truth. I set the phone down on the nightstand, turned off the lamp, and lay back against the pillows. My skull ached, my limbs felt like they were made of stone, and beneath the physical pain was something worse. Confirmation. Not suspicion, not doubt, certainty. The kind of certainty that rearranges your understanding of someone. The kind that rewrites the story you've been telling yourself for years. The room was completely dark. I listened to the old wall clock ticking in the hallway, counting seconds that didn't matter anymore. Somewhere in the quiet, I whispered to myself, "You're done begging to be seen." The phone buzzed. Less than 60 seconds after I sent the text. Lena. Of course it was her. I didn't move, didn't reach for it, just let it ring. The screen lit up in the corner of my vision like an alarm I didn't have to answer anymore. Then silence. Then a voicemail. I should have left it untouched. Let it sit there unread. But something made me tap it anyway. Her voice came through the speaker. Familiar and suddenly unfamiliar. "Mom," she began, but the pause that followed was too long, too calculated. "I know how this looks," she said, breathless, "but it's not what you think." 7 words I've come to despise. 7 words that almost always mean exactly what you think, just dressed in softer clothes. "We were supposed to be in Miami," she continued. "It's true, but Greg's parents surprised us with the Disney trip at the last minute. And I didn't want to make a scene. His mom's health hasn't been great. She really wanted this." She kept talking, filling every empty space with explanations that weren't apologies. "I thought you'd be resting anyway. I didn't think it would matter if I was gone a few extra days. I didn't think you—" She trailed off, then shifted tone. "Greg said it would be okay, that you'd understand, that it was just bad timing. I didn't mean to hurt you. But the thing is, she did. Not with knives, not with shouting, but in that cold, quiet way that says, you're not the priority. You're the afterthought. You're the footnote in someone else's fairy tale." When the message ended, I didn't cry. I didn't feel rage. I just felt empty, like something had finally been cut. By morning, the phone was filled with texts. One after another. "Are you okay? Please answer. Can we talk?" I ignored them all. Not to punish her. I wasn't playing games. I just couldn't trust myself not to say something I'd regret. And more than that, I wanted her to sit in the silence. I wanted her to feel what it was like to be ignored by someone you needed. That afternoon, while my soup sat untouched on the table, I opened my banking app. Every month, for over a year, I had transferred $800 to Lena's account, sometimes more. Help with the mortgage, private school tuition for Eli, braces, groceries. She never asked directly anymore. She didn't have to. It had become a habit, like breathing, something expected. I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered. Then I swiped the transaction away. No explanation, no notice. Just gone. Like the trust that used to hold us together. 2 days later, I got an email, not from Lena, but from Brad. Subject: following up. 2 lines. Hi Margot. Lena mentioned the usual transfer didn't come through. Everything okay on your end? No, how are you? No, hope you're recovering well. No, thank you for keeping their lives afloat when Brad's real estate commissions dried up during the pandemic. Just a question about the money. It told me everything. I didn't reply. I blocked the address. That evening, Lena texted again. This time, more direct. Hey, did the transfer get stuck or something? Just checking. I took a long breath. Then I responded, I'm recovering. Please respect that. No money this month. Her reply came instantly. Paragraphs. We're behind on the mortgage. Eli's school payment is due. I thought we were past this. This doesn't feel like you. You always said you'd be there for me. You promised. Not one word about my health. Not one sentence about how the surgery went. Not even a how's your head. Just panic about the financial gap my absence had created. For years, I had filled every hole in her life, before she even looked down and noticed the ground crumbling. I had offered stability, food, advice, time, presence, and silence, so much silence. Now, for the first time, I withheld. Not to hurt her, but because I had to. Because what she needed and what I could give were no longer the same thing. That night, I turned off my phone, lit a candle in the kitchen window, watched it flicker in the dark. It wasn't a prayer. It was a mark. A line in the sand. A small act of defiance that whispered, I'm here. I matter, even if no one else remembers. The next day, I sat down with my will. I hadn't looked at my will in over a decade. Back then, Lena was the obvious choice. My only child, my entire reason for grinding through 2 jobs, skipping vacations, and eating canned soup when bills piled up. She was my family, my future. But now the thought of leaving everything to her, what little I had, really felt like rewarding abandonment. It felt like saying, yes, take everything, even after you've taken all the parts of me that matter. I pulled the folder from the kitchen drawer. It was marked with a faded label, Estate, Personal. I opened it slowly, like peeling back skin, and removed the document. I read it carefully, line by line. My handwriting on the original copy was neat and hopeful, the way you write when you still believe everything will be okay. Then, with steady hands, I crossed Lena's name off every line. I replaced it with the name of a women's shelter 2 towns over, one I used to volunteer for before my back started giving out. A place where women clawed their way back from pain that looked a lot like mine, just on different pages. After that, I wrote a letter, nothing fancy, just 5 sentences. Clean, cold, final. I gave you everything I had. I needed you once, and you gave me nothing. That's not a debt, it's a decision. And now I'm making mine. Goodbye. I folded the letter, slid it into the will folder, and placed it back in the drawer. Then, I made tea. Not because I was thirsty, but because ritual matters when you're grieving someone who isn't dead. I sipped in silence. The light from the street lamp cast long shadows across the linoleum. The fridge hummed. The air smelled like old lemon and dust. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was done. And there's a difference. The days that followed were eerily quiet. My phone stayed dark. No texts, no voicemails, no check-ins pretending not to ask for money. I kept the television off. Eat simple meals, froze leftovers, started walking a little farther down the street each day as my head healed. Paula dropped by with soup and gentle questions, but I kept the answers short. Even the pain was fading now, physically at least. The incision itched, the staples pulled sometimes when I turned too fast, but the pressure in my skull was gone. What remained was a weight in my chest that hadn't let up. The worst part was realizing I still missed her. I still dreamed about her as a little girl with a tangled ponytail and skinned knees, asking me to read her favorite picture book for the 50th time. I missed that Lena. The one I raised, not the one who smiled in mouse ears beside another woman in a wheelchair. But I knew the truth now. Not the version she dressed up in careful excuses. Not the sugar-dusted voicemails or guilt-laced texts. The truth was that I had been convenient until I wasn't. Then one Thursday, the knock came. Not the gentle kind that neighbors give. Not the "I baked something" or just checking in kind. This knock was purposeful, short, confident. Like it assumed I would answer. I didn't move at first. I listened. Then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in person in nearly a year. "Hey, Margot, it's Brad." I froze, not in fear, but in fury. He knocked again. Just for a second, I walked to the front door and looked through the peephole. There he was, khakis, blue polo, sunglasses, hooked in his collar, like he was about to sell me a condo I couldn't afford. I opened the inner door, kept the screen latched. He smiled like we were old friends. "Rachel's in the car," he said, jerking his thumb toward the street. "She didn't want to come in if you're still upset." I looked past him. There she was, in the passenger seat, head down, pretending to scroll her phone. Too ashamed to face me, too proud to come empty-handed. "So," he continued, "I thought I'd check in. Be the bridge." I didn't answer. He shifted his weight, tone softening. "Look, I get it. Things got messy, but this freeze-out thing, it's not healthy. Rachel's stressed. The mortgage is late. Mason's school stuff is stacking up. You cutting us off without a word, it's not like you. Not like me." That's what he said. As if generosity was an identity, and I had somehow violated my role by asserting boundaries. I folded my arms. He leaned closer, voice lower. "Let's be honest, Margot. You were never part of our long-term plans. Your background, nice when convenient, exhausting when you need things. You're not really her mom anymore. Not in the way that counts." I didn't flinch. Because it wasn't just his voice saying it. I heard hers in the background of every word, rehearsed, recited. I nodded once. "Thanks," I said. "That clears things up." And I shut the door. Not slammed. Not fast. Just firm. Final. Inside, I turned on the kitchen sink. Let the water run. Let the silence return. Outside, I heard the car engine start. Heard them drive away. Later that night, I opened the will folder again and pressed my palm to it. Not to change anything. Just to be sure it was still there. After Brad's visit, the house stayed silent for a long time. Not the kind of silence you get after company leaves. Not the gentle quiet of rest. This was a deeper, colder silence, the kind that comes after a truth has landed so heavily that nothing dares follow it. I didn't turn on the TV. Didn't play music. Didn't text Paula. I just sat at the kitchen table, my hand still resting on the edge of the will folder like it was the last anchor I had. Outside, the wind rattled a tree branch against the window. Inside, I let the quiet stay. Not to wallow in it, but to understand it. Because that's the thing no one tells you. Silence isn't always emptiness. Sometimes it's instruction. Sometimes it's the only way you finally hear your own voice. I brewed tea, washed the cup, watched the sun drift across the floor like it had somewhere more important to be. And I let the space between me and Lena grow. Not because I wanted it, but because it had always been there. I just spent years pretending it wasn't. Weeks passed. No calls, no visits. Just occasional texts I didn't answer. Things like, "Hope you're feeling okay. Can we talk soon? Eli drew you something. Want me to send it?" All soft nudges, all carefully avoiding the elephant in the room. I left them unread. I wasn't trying to punish her. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I just didn't have the tools anymore to build a bridge she kept setting on fire. One morning, I was folding towels in the hallway when Paula stopped by with a tray of lemon bars. She chatted like she always did, telling me about her grandson's recital and her neighbor's lawn drama. I smiled, nodded, did my best impression of someone fully present. But as she turned to leave, she hesitated. "Oh," she said, almost as an afterthought. "I saw your daughter the other day." I looked up. She was at the pharmacy. Looked tired, worn down. "People are saying Greg's business is in trouble, that they're behind on the house." I didn't say anything. I just nodded. Thanked her for the bars. After she left, I sat at the edge of my bed for a long time, staring at the closet where I'd stored boxes of Lena's old things. Baby clothes, finger paintings, a folder of college essays she once let me read. So the cracks had started. I didn't feel smug. Didn't feel satisfied. Just confirmed. Because when people build lives on borrowed time and emotional shortcuts, the structure always gives, eventually. That's not bitterness, that's physics. I remembered how quickly Brad had said it. You were never part of our long-term plans. And I believed him. Because only someone who's rehearsed a line like that can deliver it so smoothly. Lena hadn't reached out since. Not even on my birthday, which passed with nothing but a voicemail from Eli that said, "Mom says hi." It used to hurt more. But now, it just settled. Like a scar that stopped itching. I started doing small things, again. Joined a widow's circle at the library every Tuesday afternoon. Mostly older women. Mostly sharp, dry-humored, stubborn types, like me. The kind who'd been through worse and lived to offer you homemade cobbler. I didn't tell them the full story at first, just bits. The surgery, the daughter, the silent. Clara, one of the women, nodded after I finished speaking. She wore bright scarves and said whatever came to mind. It's always the ones we give the most to who forget first. And everyone else at the table nodded like she'd said something sacred. That line stuck with me, for days. I found myself repeating it in my head while I sorted junk drawers and clipped coupons and sat on the porch during quiet sunsets. It's always the ones we give the most to who forget first. One afternoon, while cleaning out the hall closet, I found a photo. Lena, maybe 9 years old, holding a paper crown she made in 3rd grade. Glue all over her fingers. A crooked smile that took up half her face. I sat down right there on the floor and stared at it. For a long time. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in that sharp way. I was just tired. Tired of pretending she was still that girl. Tired of pretending I was still that mom. I put the photo back, but not in the box. I slid it into my nightstand drawer, like a bookmark in a story I knew would never be finished. And that should have been it. That's where the story should have ended. But it didn't. A few days later, the doorbell rang. It was mid-afternoon. Sun filtering through the blinds. I wasn't expecting anyone. I peeked through the window and my heart skipped. There she was. Lena. Alone. No Brad. No Eli. No car running in the driveway. Just her, standing on my porch, looking older and smaller than I remembered. She had a duffel bag over her shoulder and eyes that hadn't seen sleep in days. I opened the door slowly. She didn't speak for a moment. Then finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, I left. The words hit me like a gust of cold air. Not because I didn't believe her, but because I did. Because part of me always knew this was how it would unravel. Not with dignity, but with collapse. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. Not because I forgave her, but because I still had one more thing I needed to understand. Lena stepped inside, like someone who wasn't sure she was still welcome. She didn't touch anything, didn't smile, just stood there near the doorway, her duffel bag slumped at her feet, like she was waiting to be told she'd made a mistake by coming. I didn't say anything. I didn't hug her. I didn't offer her tea, or ask if she was okay, because I didn't owe her comfort, but I also didn't ask her to leave. She followed me into the kitchen and sat down at the table. The same chair Brad had stood behind just weeks earlier, but she didn't carry the same smugness. She looked stripped down, bare, like life had finally caught up to her and taken something she thought she could keep. I poured myself a glass of water and waited. She looked at the table, not at me. "He gave me a choice," she said quietly. "Brad." Her voice was hoarse, like she hadn't used it for days. "He said if I wanted to keep the house, the car, the stability, I had to stop letting you guilt me, stop bowing to your drama." Those were his words. I still didn't speak. I let her say it. All of it. She finally looked up, and in that second, I knew I was done defending him. There was a pause. Her eyes were red but dry. "I lied about the retreat," she said. "We were always going to Disney. Greg's parents invited us months earlier. I just didn't want to be the bad guy, so I became something worse instead." She closed her eyes, exhaled like she had been holding that truth in for too long. "I thought if I painted it soft enough, a work conflict, a last-minute trip, a misunderstanding, that you'd forgive me eventually. But the truth is, I didn't want to choose between you and him, and I did anyway." Still, I didn't speak. Because it wasn't time for forgiveness. It was time for truth. She looked around the room like she was seeing it for the first time, The fridge magnets, the old kettle, the stack of mail on the counter. Her gaze landed on the pink throw blanket, still folded on the couch. I told myself you'd be fine, that you were strong, that it didn't matter if I was a few days late. Her voice cracked, but that was just cowardice pretending to be logic. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask to move back in. She didn't even ask for a second chance. She just said, I need help. Not fixing, not covering, just help. And for the first time in years, that word didn't feel like a transaction. I still didn't rush to her side. I didn't offer a lifeline or soften with motherly instinct. But I didn't slam the door shut either. We sat there in silence, not the kind that hurts, the kind that waits, that listens. Maybe we wouldn't go back to what we were. Maybe we couldn't. But maybe, just maybe, we could start something else. She didn't stay that night. I didn't invite her to. She went to a motel 2 blocks away, the kind with flickering signs and paper-thin walls. But she didn't complain. And the next day, she came back. Same time, same seat, no expectations. Just presence. At first, I kept my words careful, like I was talking to a stranger at a grocery store. But she kept showing up. Not asking, not taking, just showing up. One evening, she brought a bag of groceries, put things away without saying a word, bought the right kind of tea, even remembered the unsalted butter I always used. She moved around my kitchen like she used to, not in the way that implied ownership, but in the way that implied familiarity. After she finished, she sat down, and I finally said, You don't have to keep showing up. And she replied, I'm not doing it for you. And I believed her, because something in her face had changed. She didn't look entitled anymore. She looked willing. Willing to start over. Willing to show up, without being asked. Over the next few days, we started talking. Not long conversations, not the kind that stitch wounds shut in a single go, just little exchanges. Honest ones. She told me she started looking for part-time work. Not glamorous, but honest. She told me she was trying to budget, trying to learn how to carry her own weight. And she didn't complain, didn't deflect, didn't shift blame. One evening, over cold coffee and silence, she said something that stayed with me. Brad used to mock you, called you Eeyore, said you used guilt as a weapon. She looked up and winced when she said it, like she expected me to lash out. But I just nodded. She whispered, I didn't realize how much of that I internalized, until I started saying it too. I didn't offer her absolution, didn't let her off the hook. But I did say, You're not the first daughter to forget her mother's humanity, and you won't be the last. And she nodded, like that was more grace than she'd earned. By the 3rd week, she brought Eli with her, just for an hour. He ran in and hugged me, and said, Grandma, you look less sick now. And I almost broke, not from sadness, but from how casually loving children are when adults stop feeding them excuses. He asked if we could bake cookies like we used to. And we did. I let him stir the flour and lick the spoon. He cracked the egg wrong and spilled vanilla everywhere. Lena watched from the table, eyes glassy but dry, like she was watching something she didn't think she'd get to see again. And in that moment, I didn't need an apology. I just needed that. Something real, something unguarded. Something that told me, maybe we're not done. After the cookies, Lena didn't rush to leave. She stayed behind while Eli ran outside to chase shadows and sidewalk cracks, and we sat at the kitchen table in the afterglow of flour and sugar, the smell of vanilla still hanging in the air like memory. She didn't say anything for a while, just traced the rim of her mug with her finger like it might give her the words she hadn't said yet. Then, without looking at me, she asked, Do you still have your will? I blinked. It was one of those questions that lands heavier than it sounds. I changed it, I said simply. A few weeks ago. She didn't cry, didn't protest. She just nodded, slowly, as if she'd already guessed. I would have too, she said. And that told me everything. She wasn't trying to reverse it. She wasn't angling to be put back in. She was finally accepting the cost of her choices. And something about that, about the way she didn't beg, didn't barter, shifted the air between us. That night, after she and Eli left, I sat in the living room, lights low, holding a photo of her from when she was 5. Her front teeth were missing, and her hair had been clipped too short on one side because she'd insisted on doing it herself. She wore a paper crown and a glitter glue smile. I remembered that day. She'd called herself queen of the house and paraded around with a wooden spoon like it was a scepter, and I remember thinking, I hope she keeps this strength. She did, just not in the ways I expected. In some ways her strength had grown calloused, defensive, sharp-edged, but maybe, she was starting to peel that back. A few days later, she came by with a worn manila envelope. She slid it across the table, without a word. I opened it. Inside were signed divorce papers. Final, processed, clean. She watched me with careful eyes, trying to read my reaction. But I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just folded the papers and said, good, because there wasn't more to say. Not about him. Not anymore. By the second month, she had her own place. A small apartment above a pharmacy. Nothing fancy. White walls, old linoleum, the faint smell of garlic from the downstairs tenant, but it was hers, and she paid the deposit herself. I didn't give her a dime. Not because I was punishing her, but because she didn't ask. She invited me over for takeout the day she got her keys. We sat on the floor because her furniture hadn't arrived yet, and she handed me a plastic fork like it was a peace offering. I'm not trying to pretend I didn't mess everything up, she said. I want to live in a way that doesn't ask you to fix me anymore. I believed her, not because she said it well, but because she'd stopped trying to say it perfectly. And that mattered more. A week later, she asked if she could visit on Sundays. No plans, no expectations, just time. And I said yes. Not because I missed her, but because I missed me, the version of me that believed we could still have something honest. Now every Sunday around 5, she knocks on the door. Sometimes with Eli, sometimes alone. She doesn't come with excuses or explanations. She just shows up. We sit at the table, or on the porch, or go for walks. Sometimes we talk about real things. Sometimes we talk about grocery prices, or weather, or the ridiculousness of TV commercials. But no matter what we talk about, it's her presence that matters. One Sunday, she brought a small potted plant, a fern. It's unkillable, she said with a crooked smile. Like you. I laughed for the first time in weeks. And it felt real. The kind that lives in your chest, instead of your throat. She still makes mistakes. I do too. But we own them now. There's no more pretending we didn't break something. Now, we just try to build from what's left. We're relearning each other. Not as mother and daughter, but as two women, two survivors, two people who made choices, some good, some unforgivable, and are learning to live with what remains. The word mother doesn't feel the same anymore. Neither does daughter. But what we have now, it's not built on roles. It's built on reality. And some days, that's enough. Some days, it feels like a miracle. And some days, it still hurts. But every Sunday, when she knocks on the door and I open it, not with hesitation, but with clarity, I think this is what healing looks like. Not fast, not perfect, but real. And real is enough. The Sundays became a rhythm. Not a ritual, not a performance, just a rhythm. She'd knock. I'd answer. Sometimes she'd bring Eli, sometimes just herself. Some days we spoke. Some days we didn't. And that was okay. It wasn't about words anymore. It was about the fact that she kept showing up, without asking for anything, without trying to rewrite the past, without trying to fix it all in a single visit. That was the difference. She wasn't rushing anymore. Neither was I. One Sunday, she brought me a photo album. Not new, an old one I hadn't seen in years. She'd found it while packing up the last of her things from the house she left behind. I figured, maybe you'd want this, she said, setting it down like it might explode. I opened it slowly. Inside were years I'd forgotten. Birthday parties, school plays, lazy mornings with her curled up on the couch in my oversized sweaters. And then a photo of us from when she was 16. I remembered that day. I had taken her out for sushi to celebrate her first job. She'd worn too much eyeliner. I'd worn too much hope. I smiled. Not at her. At the girl in the photo. The one who still believed closeness was possible. I was awful to you that year, Lena said, her voice soft. You were 16, I replied. No, she insisted. I was cruel, and you still drove me to work every morning, packed my lunch, and left notes in my glove box. I closed the album. There's a difference between being cruel and being lost, I said. You were the second. The first came later. She didn't argue. We didn't need to dissect it. Some wounds don't need surgery, just exposure to air and time. That same week, she got a job at a community clinic front desk, part-time, low pay, but steady, and hers. She texted me a photo of her new badge. It had her name on it, slightly off-center. I smiled when I saw it. Not because of pride. Because of ownership. Because for the first time, she wasn't sending me a request. She was sending me a proof of life. She started budgeting, started saying no when people tried to hand her chaos. She even started declining help from me. Not out of pride, but out of practice. She was learning how to carry herself. One day, she caught me staring at her while she scrubbed the kitchen sink. "What?" she asked, half laughing. "You're different," I said. She didn't smile. She nodded. "I had to be," she replied. There was no one left to save me this time. That stuck with me. Because I think we both realized something crucial in that moment. Sometimes the only way people learn to walk is when the floor finally disappears beneath them. I had been the floor for a long time. And when I pulled away, I thought she'd fall. But she didn't. She staggered. She stumbled. But then she stood. And watching her stand, not for applause, not for me, not for image, but for herself, that's when something inside me finally softened. That Sunday, I made dinner. Real dinner. Not just takeout or leftovers. Chicken and rosemary potatoes. Her favorite. She noticed the effort. Didn't comment on it. Just helped set the table. It wasn't a peace treaty. It wasn't a celebration. It was a Tuesday meal on a Sunday evening, and it was more than enough. That night, after they left, I sat with my tea and let the stillness settle into something warm. Not silence, not distance, just space. Space that had once been filled with tension, now held breathing room. I opened the folder with my will, not because I intended to change it, just to look. I ran my finger over the names, the shelter I had chosen. I thought about calling them, about visiting, about leaving a donation, regardless. But I didn't revise the paperwork. Not yet. Not because I was waiting for Lena to earn her way back into my inheritance, but because I was watching her earn her way back to herself. And that mattered more. One day, maybe I'll change it. Maybe not. That's not the point. The point is, I no longer live on the edge of someone else's promise. I live on ground I chose. And it holds. The first time someone asked me how Lena was doing, I didn't know what to say. It was Paula, of course. Who else? She'd stopped by to return my pie dish, the one I hadn't even noticed she'd taken. We stood at the porch and she said it casually, like she was asking about the weather. "So how's Lena doing these days?" I opened my mouth, closed it, then finally said, "She's learning." Paula nodded, like that was enough. And maybe it was, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to explain her. I wasn't trying to defend or qualify or soften the edges of what had happened. I just said what was true and left it there. That night, I sat at the table with my tea and thought about all the times I'd answered that question differently. "She's doing great. She's busy, you know? Work. She's got her hands full with Eli." All those times, I had spoken like a press secretary, like my job was to smooth the narrative, like it was somehow my responsibility to make Lena's life palatable to the world, even when it was unraveling in front of me. But now I just wanted to be Margot, not Lena's mother, not Eli's grandmother, not the dependable emergency contact who never said no, just me. Just the woman who survived a surgery, a betrayal, and a life that taught her how to disappear without ever actually leaving. The woman who was learning how to speak again, for herself. On a Sunday in early spring, Lena brought Eli to help me in the garden. He wore mismatched gloves and asked a million questions about earthworms and mulch. Lena sat on the steps, watching him dig like he was discovering treasure. "He's different lately," she said. "Softer, less anxious." I nodded. "Kids can feel tension," I said. "They just don't have the vocabulary for it." She didn't reply right away. Just looked down at her hands, fingernails stained with soil. "I used to think I was protecting him by keeping the peace," she said. "By keeping the image. But you weren't keeping yourself," I said. And that's when she looked at me, like she saw me fully for the first time. Later that week, I found a note in my mailbox. No envelope, Just folded paper with a familiar slant in the handwriting. I know I can't undo the harm. I'm not asking to be who I was before. But if you'll let me be someone new, I'll keep showing up as her. Rel. I stood on the porch for a long time with that note in my hand. It didn't undo anything. It didn't erase the photos I never got. The birthdays missed. The feeling of sitting in a hospital bed and scanning for a face that never arrived. But it did matter. Because she wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was offering presence. She was saying, let me rebuild from truth. That's all I ever wanted. Not a perfect daughter. Just an honest one. Now when she visits, she no longer walks in like she's entering a house of glass. She walks in. Like it's real. Like it might hold her, but won't break if she leans on it. I noticed the first time she walked over to the stove and stirred the soup without asking. Or when she opened the fridge and started putting groceries away without checking first. It was muscle memory. But it was also something new. Comfort without assumption. Familiarity without entitlement. One afternoon, while Eli napped on the couch, she said, I know you haven't changed the will back. I didn't answer. I'm not asking you to, she added. I nodded. Good. She smiled. And it wasn't sad. It was peaceful. That day, I realized something I hadn't before. Forgiveness isn't always an announcement. Sometimes it's just the way your hands don't shake when they pass the salt. Sometimes it's the way you remember to buy the tea she likes, even if you don't say anything about it. Sometimes it's just the act of showing up again and again with no script and no expectations. By April, her apartment felt lived in. She got a couch from a resale shop, a secondhand table with mismatched chairs. Eli drew a crayon rainbow on the wall, and she didn't scold him. She framed it. She was building something from scratch. No borrowed scaffolding, no financial crutch. Just Lena. One visit, she handed me a small envelope. Inside was a card. Happy recovery day, Mom. Inside she wrote, you came back from something I never would have survived. Thank you for not giving up on yourself. Even when I gave up on you. I'm learning. And I love you. Not because you gave me everything, but because you finally gave something to yourself. I didn't cry, but something inside me loosened. Like a knot I hadn't realized I'd tied around my own name. Because that's what I'd done, tied myself to a role for so long that I forgot Margot existed underneath. Now I remember her. She drinks tea on the porch. She walks to the library on Wednesdays. She bakes lemon bars with Eli and lets him eat the batter. She pays her own bills, turns off her phone at night, lights a candle for no reason. She's not the fallback. Not the ATM. Not the invisible hand that holds everyone up while going unnoticed. She's Margot. And that's enough. Now when people ask about Lena, I don't say we fixed things. I say we're learning each other all over again, like strangers who used to share a house, but never really talked. And that's the truth. She's not my little girl anymore. And I'm not just her mother. We're two grown women with scar tissue, regret, and choices we both have to live with. But we're doing something rare. We're sitting with it. No script. No performance. Just presence. Most Sundays she still comes by. Eli too. Sometimes he brings a comic book and reads it aloud, like he's doing a stage play. Sometimes Lena brings groceries, not because I need them, but because she wants to contribute something real. Sometimes we talk about things like grief, or bills, or how to grow basil without killing it. And sometimes we sit in silence, folding laundry, or peeling apples, like people who've made peace with the quiet between them. There are still sharp edges. Sometimes I feel them when she slips into a tone that sounds too familiar, too much like Brad, too much like old Lena. And sometimes I catch myself saying something too clipped, too cold, like I'm preparing for disappointment before it happens. But we notice it now. We acknowledge it. And we move through it like people who know better but aren't perfect. And in a strange way, that's the part I'm most grateful for. Not that we avoided the fracture, but that we both walked through it, bleeding, limping, but awake. The old version of us was brittle. The new version is cracked, but flexible. Worn in. It bends now. Sometimes she brings a notebook and reads things she's been writing. Essays, reflections, fragments. Some of them are about me. Some of them are about her. Some are apologies she's never spoken aloud. I don't need her to read them, but I let her. Because maybe part of healing is letting someone show you who they're trying to be, even if it's not who you asked for. And I think that's what makes the difference now. She doesn't show up expecting forgiveness as payment. She shows up trying to earn trust in installments. Small, steady, sincere. One night, we sat on the porch watching the neighborhood lights flicker on one by one, like stars too polite to arrive all at once. She said, "I think I used to think of you as a lighthouse. But now I realize you were the lifeboat." I raised an eyebrow. "That's supposed to be flattering?" She smiled. "I don't know, but I always thought you were supposed to stay planted, glowing in the distance, ready to save me when I wrecked." She paused. "But now I see you were in the storm with me, just quieter, just rowing." I didn't say anything for a long time, not because I didn't know how to respond, but because sometimes that's the only way to honor the truth, by letting it echo. When she left that night, I stood by the door for a long time. Then I walked over to the kitchen drawer, opened the will folder again. I stared at the name of the shelter I'd written in ink. I didn't cross it out. I didn't put Lena's name back in. I just added something beside it. To be determined. Not as a threat, not as a test. Just as an acknowledgement that legacy should be earned, not assumed. And maybe she was on her way there. Maybe not. That night I lay in bed, the photo of Lena in the paper crown tucked back into the drawer, and I thought about everything we carry as women. The invisible labor, the expectations we inherit, the roles we get assigned and then punished for fulfilling too well. And I realized something. All those years I spent being her safety net, I wasn't just keeping her from falling. I was keeping myself from rising. Because rising meant risking her resentment, meant choosing my own peace at the cost of her comfort, but I did it. And now, finally, my heartbeat sounds like it belongs to me. No one else. If I could speak to every mother who feels like a background character in her own story, I'd say this: you don't have to be the lifeboat forever. You don't have to disappear to be loved. You don't have to subsidize someone else's growth with your own silence. Let the silence speak back. Let it fill the room until your own voice finds its way through. Because that's what I did. And I'm not whole, but I'm honest. I'm not healed, but I'm here. I'm Margot. And for the first time in my life, I'm not waiting to be chosen. I've chosen me. And that's enough.